We are back. Senators, Twins, baseball, past, present, and future. My name is Ralph Tyko with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and we're going to have a whopper of a show today because Clyde Doepner is back, and probably the ultimate Twins fan in the world, certainly the ultimate Twins collector of memorabilia and what have you. Chad Rubin is supposed to be here as one of the hosts. George Case may or may not be here this morning. And Ronnie Rabinovitz is here. Ronnie,
hey, Ralph.
How are you, sir?
How you doing? Good. How are you, buddy?
Good. You're. I didn't mean to shortchange you. You're one of the best Twins fans going as well.
Yes, I am.
Even if you are a Dodger fan, and when it comes down to it, you'd root for the Dodgers if the Pope's team was playing. Probably especially if the Pope's team was playing. But that's for another show.
That's right.
What I'd like you to do.
Hi, George Case here.
Hi, George.
George Case is here. How are you?
Just fine, thanks.
Good. We're. I don't know if you know that Clyde Doepner is here. Coming back to join us, and
yeah, I heard that, and welcome back, Clyde.
Thank you, George. Good to hear your voice.
Thank you.
Yeah, you guys go back a long way, and Ronnie and Clyde had a good year rooting for the Twins.
Yep. Clyde and I are very dear friends, and I really appreciate your coming back on the show, Clyde. You're a terrific addition. We loved you last time, and we'll love you again this time.
Well, I hope your prediction comes true, Ron. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Well, I know Ronnie's got to be real happy because he's got the Dodgers and doing great.
Yeah, I'm very happy. Yeah,
right.
Dodgers are up 2-0, going back to Arizona. So the Twins had a great year. Even
Ronnie,
when the Yankees
you
beat them,
Clyde initially, you became good friends?
Clyde and I met down at the ballpark, and we became the dearest of friends, and he's been so helpful and friendly to me. He's taken me on the field on Jackie Robinson Day many times. I visited with him. He gave me a jersey. It's been fun. We had a great relationship. We hit it off from day one, didn't we, Clyde?
We did. When I get older, I want to be just like you, Ron. I feel really good about knowing you. And I have a term for people that really understand the significance of events and happenings. And my term is they get it. And, Ron, you get it. I just wonder.
Thank you.
I'm amazed at what you've carried forward and any little part I can play, like you mentioned, Jackie Robinson Day on the field, giving you a team used number 42 Jackie Robinson jersey. I'm just honored to do that and knowing how well it's going to be taken care of and carried forward.
It sure will be. Absolutely, buddy. So tell us about the Twins this year. They had a great year.
Well, we're thrilled. I go out and give a lot of talks. I've given over 60 talks off-site this year so far. Got a few coming up in the next few weeks. But the gist was, when they had their losing streak going, it was like I'd give a talk, and for a couple of attendees, I'd have a big target on my chest. It gave them permission to take a few shots, and I would usually look at it this way. I'd look at a gentleman and say, you look like you're about my age. You must remember 1990. Yeah, I do. What's your point? And I'd say, well, in 1990, we had the worst record in baseball. And in 1991, we not only made the playoffs, we won the World Series. And I said, I'm an optimist. And it can happen again. And, well, we didn't go that far, but we sure made the playoffs. And I just thought it was a wonderful, wonderful year. 2 of Paul's 3 years, referring to Paul Molitor, have been really good, successful winning seasons. And The last year, everything went wrong, and this year, everything started to fall in place. So, yes, we feel very good about it, very optimistic.
And nice.
That's
Quickly,
great.
let me say that David Hubler is here, too.
Yes, I thought, yeah.
And
Hi, how are you?
Hey, David, how are you? I didn't know you were on.
Yep, I'm here.
Good.
David is
Hi,
going to
David.
join us as a full-timer, and happy to have you. You and George are going to talk about some Senators' memories after a bit, but I want to elaborate on this great season for the Twins. Who surprised you most on the Twins as an overproducer?
Well, I don't think it. I understand your question. I don't think it's so much that. It's if you would have asked me that question, in 2016, I would have been able to give a lot of examples, and they may not necessarily have been positive.
Right.
Major League Baseball, the writers, the magazines, the predictors for the last 2-3 years prior to this year had noted that we had Byron Buxton, we had Rosario, we had Sano, we had Vargas, we had Barreros, and so forth in the minor leagues, and they were waiting for their breakout year. And last year, 2016, the previous year when they were brought up, some of them out of sheer need, and they might not have been quite ready, but they brought them up to find out. It didn't work out as we mentioned. This year, I think all of them are starting to live up to not just the predictions of the Twins organization, but to live up to the predictions of all of the people that thought, hey, these are some pretty special people. So as the year went on and Buxton, they corrected one little flaw in his swing. He'd lift up his foot a little bit, a la Kirby Puckett, and they found out that jerked his swing a little too much in the big leagues. Got by with it in the minors. And
now, is that
made
Chili Davis, who's still the batting coach?
They had several people, yes, giving the input that keep flat, keep your shoulders level, keep your sight level, and that made a huge difference. When Barreros kept getting tougher and tougher, and when, he started to realize what worked in the big leagues that he got by with in the minor leagues, and so forth. You look at Rosario and the way he grew as just a solid near 300 hitter. A lot of good things came out of Sano, but obviously he's still a work in progress. When you swing that hard every time, you get a lot of strikeouts too.
Does this go down as your favorite Twin team of all time, given everything?
Oh, no, that can't happen. Okay. I still got too good of a memory for 65, 67, 69, 70. But yes, as far as the most young kids to ever come together, this equals what happened in the mid-'80s when you look at a photo and you've got, Kirby Puckett sitting in the middle of Kent Herbeck and Guy Addy and Doepner and the boys. This is it definitely equals that. But these are kids. I mean, there's a lot of low 20s, not even to the mid-20s yet.
Yeah,
so,
young, very young, yeah.
And this is optimistic for me. This is the start of a group of people that I continue to see growth next year, and I see nothing but win-win coming up in the future.
Me too.
Nice.
Me too.
Nice.
What about pitching?
Well, if there's a big question mark over the off season, it's going to be pitching. We have Santana, we had Barreros, we have Gibson, who showed some real growth as the year went on. We've got a couple of kids we hope internally from the minor leagues that can come up, but that's going to be the real challenge for Derek Quality and Thad Levine in the off season, as I see it. They're going to, and they know, I'm not telling them anything they don't know. They're going to have to address the issue. Obviously, my hope is if there's ends up being two really good starters out there, not people that are slightly past their prime, but two really good starters out there. We have to find a way to get at least one of them. I mean, that's the big question mark. And then, Yes, we've got some arms we hope can turn into a classic closer, but that's the big question mark for me.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the other positions are pretty solid. We've got some depth in the minor leagues, but pitching is, like with us and all teams, pitching is the big question mark.
Right.
Boy,
Exactly.
I'll tell you one thing that comes to my mind when I listen to you, Clyde. You sound like a Harry Carey before he became a caricature of himself.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people out there, or if you guys remember, that Harry Carey was a terrific announcer. And I don't know if it was the adulation and the celebrity or the booze or a combination of it. He turned into not exactly, he was still beloved and all that. But he could break down a team. I remember listening to him, the old Cardinals and what have you. And you're terrific. You really give a great analyzation, and I paid you a high compliment there because Harry Carey was one of the best.
Well, coming from you, that is a compliment. Thank you.
No, I have a question, Ronnie and Clyde, for both of you. And I haven't followed it, and I don't know maybe the decision's made. But what's the status of Paul Molitor for next year?
Well, they haven't officially announced anything yet, but they met, they met last week, meaning Paul Bay, Levine, Dave St. Peter, the front office people that'll make the determination, and every indication, and I right now will go with what I read in the paper. It sounds like Paul's definitely going to be here, and they're just right now tweaking the details and tweaking.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that because I really didn't know.
Yeah.
Clyde.
It was a doubt.
I'm sorry.
Listening to you, Clyde, I was thinking the very same could be said about the Yankees this year. As you were going, it was a surprisingly good year. Young kids, the same thing you talked about. The question of whether Girardi will be back is still an open question, and the need for pitching. That's the Yankees' primary need. The bullpen is set pretty much, but they do definitely need at least one more starting pitcher. So maybe it'll be the Twins and the Yankees fighting it out for if there's a decent free agent pitcher out there.
Well, I think several teams obviously look at it that way, but I know what you mean. I do follow the Yankees, and as an aside, I'm still a Dodgers fan because I'm an old St. Paul kid, North St. Paul, and that was our parent ball club. And
that's right.
Once a year, Brooklyn would come in town and play the St. Paul Saints, and I still have my old autograph book from when I was 8, 9, and 10 in the 50s. I still, have a lot of good autographs from the Major League club, and I would get autographs from the Saints all year, and then when they made it up to the big leagues, I'd stick that first Topps rookie card in my autograph book to prove they made it. So, yeah, there's a lot of optimism.
Yeah, that's
Let me take the opportunity to learn something from you guys. I was a Giant fan growing up in New York, and they were, in 1956, about to move to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and where Willie took his apprenticeship, if you will, hit like 423 in 1951 before they called him up. And they were basically all set to go. Now, O'Malley needed the Giants out on the West Coast to balance it. You couldn't have teams coming out to play one team, not two, on the long West Coast swing as it was in those days. And St. Louis was as West Coast as they got. And this was another 1,500 miles or so. So O'Malley needed Stoneham to go to San Francisco. That being said, did he try to pull because St. Paul and and Minneapolis was a farm system. Minneapolis was a farm system.
For the Giants, right. And
for the Dodgers.
Right.
Did they own the rights to Minneapolis, and did he use that as a stick to get O'Malley? In other words, you're not going to move here. That we have territorial rights. Did he use that particular instance to get them out to the West Coast? I'll ask you guys.
Well, I can reflect briefly on that. Yeah, there was a big hope when we built Met Stadium. Met Stadium was by far and away the best minor league stadium that was built at that time, because it was built with the hope that either the Dodgers or the Giants would come here. And so we built a multi-deck stadium that could be easily expanded as it was. And unfortunately for us, both of them flew over the top and went to the West Coast for the reasons you mentioned. And then our next choice was the Washington Senators, and they came here. And so there was the ownership. I've got the paperwork when they tossed everything, when they moved out of the Met. I've got the paperwork that outlines how they had to literally, when the Senators came here, they had to buy up from the American Association the rights to this area. And so it was always a deal, more or less a minor league agreement, that St. Paul would be there and Minneapolis would be with that minor league team, and then you'd go to Omaha and all the other teams in the American Association. So the Senators / Twins had to buy out from St. Paul, Minneapolis, the American Association, the right to move the team here. And the Giants would have had to do the same thing, because by moving a team here, it eliminated two minor league teams. It eliminated both St. Paul and Minneapolis, of course. Mm-hmm. And so that ended up being a savior, because we put all of our eggs in the first two baskets, meaning the Dodgers and the Giants. And we thought we had a natural tie-in because of their minor league affiliation. But for the reasons you mentioned, they moved to the West Coast. Yep.
And when they did, when the Nats moved to Minnesota, Washington got another franchise instantaneously. And
right.
George Case's dad was a coach on that team, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he was, and the fact is that Clyde, I was not aware of all the behind the scenes stuff that was going on there, because I know that Calvin Griffith had been made a tremendous deal offer from Minneapolis St. Paul, and took it and moved the team, but moved it with a stipulation that Washington would have an expansion team. Well, a lot of the fans, as David will attest to, I mean, a lot of the Washington fans were very unhappy when the Twins, became, when the Senators left and became the Twins, because they were just building a tremendous ball club. And
that's right,
Washington, yes. Washington had not had, really much in the way of success for many, many years. And then all of a sudden, here's guys like Killebrew and Allison and Lemon, and they're playing, and Twin and Pascal and Ramos, and all of a sudden they're gone, and they're now in Minnesota, and the expansion team comes in, also called the Washington Senators, but with a lot of aging veterans and unproven players. So, a lot of the fans would go to the games at Griffith Stadium where they first had to play, since the D.C. Stadium was not ready, and say, hey, who are these guys? They didn't really even know who they were.
Yeah, if they were angry the first time the team left, they were even more angry the second time.
Well, yeah, the second time.
Short pulled them out,
The second time, David, was horrible, but the first time, at least they had a team on the field.
Right,
the second time they had absolutely nothing. I mean, it was totally gone.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. It'd be like if somebody pulled the Twins out right now, when you figure finally the young Killebrew emerged, and Allison and Versalles is coming up, and Allison had been Rookie of the Year before, right, and so forth. So I can only imagine what that caused.
taking nothing away from the anger of the fans in D.C., you have to remember that the New York fans, and you, Ralph, as a Giants fan, and all those Giants and Dodger games in New York were like World Series games, and when the two teams pulled out virtually simultaneously, there was a good deal of anger, and I'm sure, and not that I'm sure, but I know there are a lot of former Brooklyn Dodger fans and New York Giants fans, who said, that's it, I'm not doing anything more, I'm not following baseball anymore. There was a tremendous amount of anger and a sense of loss within the city itself.
Yeah. The individual fan cut off their nose that did that and responded that way ends up cutting their nose off to spite their face. That's all that happens. Sadly, I understand if you root for somebody with such fervor, how can you accept? It took me 5 years to get over it, and another 50 to really get over it, and I haven't yet. And the 5 years was because they threw the Mets at New York like throwing us a bone, and they were beloved. They were this, that, and the other thing, and continue to be a terrific franchise. Blah blah blah. It wasn't the same as the Giant-Dodger rivalry. Nothing can replace, especially Brooklyn. I have to say I'm a Giant fan, but if you lived in Brooklyn, you could have and probably did have a Dodgers shopping at the Safeway or whatever it was that that you shopped at, going to the drugstore, walking down the street. It was, they were family. They accepted Jackie.
That's true, and I think the Giants. I don't think too many Giant players actually lived in Manhattan. Just like there weren't many Yankees players who lived in the Bronx. Most of them lived in New Jersey. So Brooklyn was unique in that respect. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I got to say, and it's not because I was an 11-year-old kid when they left, and it really did break my heart. But for all kids in all sports, teams should be eminent domain. If it's not working, then you pay the price a little bit, and you have a bad year and what have you, and the city sucks up the difference. But you don't just indiscriminately move them out. And when I say it's indiscriminate, the Washington Senators moving to Minnesota and quickly getting a team back. So a deal was made. If Minnesota needed a team, they should have had an expansion team, just like the California Angels had an expansion team.
Ralph, what you're saying there, and David, I think, and Clyde, I've heard that many times, that the people, felt that if the American League was going to expand, that the Washington Ball Club, as it stood, should stay in Washington, and the expansion team should go to Minnesota. Just like the expansion team went to Los Angeles with the California Angels, Los Angeles Angels.
I don't know what the city politics are, but the fans came out on the lower end there.
Oh, absolutely.
And really, the fans of both franchises, if you stop to think about it, because the Angels have a certain amount of pride in looking back on that first team that Eli Gerbo won the first game with Albie Pearson, the former senator, and what have you, that was their team. I'll bet there are fans in Minnesota, even when they were doing well, and they did very well early on in their existence, saying, well, that's Washington's team. That's, I'm not there, but I could only imagine, and I'll bet there are kids that were very confused. You get a 7-year-old who rooted for the Senators. Next year, he's coming in to play the Senators. That kind of thing.
Well, I know it was a big deal in Washington when I think it was that first year the Twins played the Senators at Griffith Stadium, and I think Washington swept them, and that was a big deal
really?
for the local fans. They said, "Oh my gosh, here's all of our former heroes. They come into town, and our new guys who we don't even know who they are, they wind up winning."
Well, and it had to hurt even more a year later in 1962. The Twins finished second. They ran second all year to the New York Yankees for the championship.
Right.
So that's what the Senators had been waiting for, these young kids to mature like we've been waiting here. And I can only imagine the disappointment. We were pleased when they came, but I, too, remember a lot of my uncles and a lot of adults saying, do you know how lucky we are to get a major league team like the Senators rather than an expansion team?
Well, they had been building that, Clyde. That was the thing. Washington never had long ball power. They just didn't have it. Griffith Stadium was 407 feet down the left field line, so right-handed power was non-existent. They finally got Roy Sievers, and then following Sievers, they got Killebrew and Lemon and Allison to put the seats. I mean, they moved the stands in. They're reaching the bleachers now, and all of a sudden they're gone, and they're now in Minnesota, and they're back to an expansion team with absolutely no right-handed power.
Right.
Yep. And it took years to get them to be decent, and all of a sudden they're gone to
right.
Well, it wasn't
they bring in Frank Howard, who was a tremendous long ball threat, hit some of the longest shots probably in Major League Baseball history, and then all of a sudden, 1971, Bob Short picks up the ball club, moves to Texas, and they have nothing again.
For how many years? 38 years. There was no baseball.
Yeah, I think it was something like that. Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Whoa. And Baltimore,
in the nation's capital. Yeah, that's what.
Right.
Get them back in Washington. Baltimore.
I know that I used to drive my dad crazy because he'd be interviewed or be talking and say, well, George, what do you think? He'd say, to me, I have a hole in my heart. I mean, I loved Washington. I played there all my career except for 1 year. I knew everybody in Washington. All of a sudden, there's absolutely no Major League Baseball in D.C. whatsoever. Nothing. And that is the nation's capital without a Major League Baseball team.
And, George, to boot, there wasn't even a minor league team anywhere near.
No.
And of course, Baltimore got its team.
Back, they don't even have the decency to start each season with the Senators playing whomever.
The opening day. Yes.
Opening day.
Yeah, that had been a tradition. The President of the United States would throw out the first ball. That was a tradition. Griffith Stadium, then was followed when Kennedy, took over and became president for a year or two before he was assassinated at D.C. Stadium. And now all of a sudden,
I don't have an alibi for that assassination, George, but you and Kennedy did have a meeting.
That was an unusual occurrence. I mean, here I am. They're at Griffith Stadium.
Let's talk about your alibi.
I want to hear this story.
I'm sitting. The story is, I'm sitting in the dugout. I had just worked out. My dad. I was a junior at Rutgers, and Mickey Vernon. My dad said, "Hey, why don't you put a uniform on, take batting practice, infield practice?" And I was thrilled. And here it is at Griffith Stadium. So I'm at the, playing where my dad had played, and it was quite a thrill for me. So after infield and batting practice, I went into the clubhouse, got a shower, came back out, dressed in my street clothes, and sat in the Washington dugout. All of a sudden, President Kennedy and his entourage come onto the field, which they normally do for opening day, and the ball players are all lined up on the first and third base lines, and I'm sitting there. And all of a sudden, and the presidential box is right next to the Washington dugout. All of a sudden, I'm surrounded by Secret Service agents, and they're pointing their fingers at me, say, "Who the heck are you?" And I said, "I'm George Case's son." They said, "George Case's son? Who's George Case?" And I said, "Well, my dad's a coach with the Center." He said, "Well, you bring him over here. Point him out and bring him over here." So all of a sudden, a couple Secret Service agents will go out to the first base line, bring my dad into the dugout, and he's got to, tell the Secret Service agents, "Yes, that's my son. He can sit there." Because I think in all the planning that the Secret Service does for personal appearances of the president, they have all kinds of contingency plans. Well, obviously I wasn't in one of their plans because I'm just some guy sitting next to the President of the United States in the dugout.
That's funny.
That is funny. That's a great
You
story.
taught me something. I always pictured that ceremony that we talk about with the president taking place from the stands.
It did, Ralph. It took place from the stands. The presidential box was in the stands directly next to the Washington dugout. So that's where the president would throw out the first ball. Now later, it became, part of the deal that the President of the United States would throw out the first ball from the pitcher's mound. But for many years, beginning with Taft, I think, in 1911, the President of the United States would throw out the first ball to the players assembled in front of the presidential box at Griffith Stadium.
There are so many pictures of that. In fact, one of the more interesting aspects of throwing out the first ball from the stands was that finally, when World War II was over and Harry Truman got to throw out the first ball, he would alternate his pitches. He was ambidextrous, and one year he'd throw with the right hand, and the next year he'd throw with his left hand. And he really enjoyed that. He was a big baseball fan, and he just really had a good time doing that. But one other point, I think those 30 some odd years where there was no baseball in Washington really killed the whole presidential appearance. I mean, there were several lately, but not to the same extent, not to the same enthusiasm of the crowd. I was there the night that George W. Bush threw out first pitch, and there wasn't, I won't say wasn't any, but the boos certainly outweighed the number of cheers for him throwing out the first pitch from the pitcher's mound.
Right.
So the great institution.
Harrowing times.
Yeah,
it's a different era too, because back then, I mean, I've seen photographs. I mean, there's the President of the United States, beginning with Taft and through Wilson and Coolidge and Roosevelt and all. I mean, they were an institution for the government and for the United States, and the fans loved to see them, and they could get up close and personal. And I've even seen pictures when Kennedy and Johnson were at I think it was at RFK for the first throwing out of the ball at the new ballpark, and they're standing next to one another, the President of the United States and the Vice President of the United States. Well, today, because of all the concerns about terrorism and everything else, that would never happen today.
I wonder if the idea hit Johnson about peeling off of the motorcade at just that moment when he was planning it all out.
Yeah, Ralph, who knows? But I mean, it's just one of those things that baseball, I mean, for me, with my dad and as David with his book, I mean, baseball, the traditions of baseball, dated back 100 years, and now, I mean, my personal opinion, a lot of that tradition has been lost.
If you go up by Dave St. Peter's offices and at Target Field, on the hallway leading up to his office are all the big 24 by 36-inch photographs of the presidents throwing out the first pitch. We have that tradition alive and well pictorially at Target Field.
Yeah, well, it's good to hear that, Clyde.
First year, Walter Johnson was the one that Taft threw the ball to.
Right.
So they used the symbolism from the president to the best pitcher in baseball, if you will.
Right.
And we take a lot of pride in that, keeping that as a history teacher.
Clyde, let me ask you a question.
Whole big story behind the correspondence between the presidents and Clark Griffith and Cal Griffith regarding throwing out the first pitch and the background information behind the correspondence with the wives, sending letters, talking about thank you for the alligator handbag, thank you for the season pass, thank you for the welcome luncheon.
Yeah, Clark Griffith made a point every year of presenting the season pass to the President of the United States in the Oval Office, and always just so happened to have a little gift for the First Lady.
Yeah, and I think I may have told the story before on the network, but in researching the Nats and the Grays, I discovered that there was a brief exchange from Harry Truman when he was vice president. He sent Griffith a thank you note for getting his pass that year, and the note is it's on White House official vice presidential stationery, and it's dated the actual day that Roosevelt died. April 15th, 1945. And it's a typewritten note, and it's got his signature on it, but below that, he scribbled a personal note that I guess finally when the secretary or whomever brought the note in for him to sign off on, scribbled a personal note saying, at that point he knew that he was now the president, and he scribbled a little note saying he was pretty sorry that he probably would not be able to make opening day, which was like another week, and maybe later on, because he was now president and involved in wrapping up World War II. It's an interesting little sidelight to the whole relationship between Griffith and Roosevelt.
That really is very interesting. I didn't realize that that note existed, David. That's very, very interesting.
Yeah, and not only does it exist, but the fact that it happened right on the day that Roosevelt died.
Right.
Wow.
Clyde, when you were here, you told a great story about a note that Truman wrote, and that a letter that you have in your possession. My God, I remember Ronnie and I going, "Holy Toledo!"
Yes, I remember.
It was dealing with the tradition where I have the letter from Eisenhower to Clark Griffith saying, "Thank you for inviting me to throw out the first pitch. I'm warming up. I'm getting ready for that event, and I will be there." And then right after that, there's a letter from notifying them that he will not. Rawlings actually sent the letter. They mentioned they were sending a glove with Eisenhower's name on it, and be sure and get it in effect. Be sure and get it in the picture, because in about half the photos, you'll notice the president's wearing a glove. Mm-hmm. And if you could manage to get the logo of the glove maker in the photograph, well, that's free advertising in every daily, weekly, monthly newspaper that's going to run that photo. So then right after that, Rawlings sent another letter saying, "We heard Ike isn't going to throw out the first pitch because he's going golfing instead." And so we are sending a glove along with Vice President Nixon's name on it, and I'm sure the same logic, please get it in the picture. And then right after that's a letter from Nixon saying, "I just found out I get to throw out the first pitch. I'm really excited. Trish and I'll be there," etc. And then there's the telegram you referred to from former President Truman, who already had some ideas about Nixon. And his telegram said, "Saw where Nixon is throwing out the first pitch. Don't let him throw you a curve." Now, think of the baseball connotation to a political sentiment. That's beautiful.
Right. That's a wonderful story.
I came out with a book a few years ago on the Minnesota Twins through memorabilia, and I have the photograph of that correspondence from former President Truman at the time in the book, and I told the story. That's interesting to me as a history teacher and as a baseball historian.
Clyde, you might be the one. Clyde, you might be the one person I could talk to about this, because I'm a one-man salesman for it. Down at Old Tinker Field, there was a monument to Clark Griffith. It was a brass plaque on a concrete statue with a big baseball on the top. And when I was down there researching the book, my son took some pictures of the plaque, because it looked like Tinker Field was going to be demolished, which eventually it was. And I've got a picture of the plaque in the book. But I tried to get some of the current Nationals officials to want to reproduce that photo of the plaque along their walls, where they've got all the history of the teams, and no one seemed to be particularly interested in it. Do you know whether you've got one of those pictures up in Minnesota?
We were told, to answer your question, I do not know of the existence of a photo. We were told that Washington has that plaque. And
no, that's not true. Because
that's where I got dead-ended, because we built a nice site down there on the previous site of a little park-like setting, where the ballpark was down there. And at that time, we tried to come up with the plaque, and we were told by the Tinker Field people that Washington had retrieved it.
No.
So
when was that? When were you told that?
We were told that just 2 years ago.
Yeah, well, that's about the time that it was stolen. Because
my concern it was stolen and melted down or something.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, that's. I was following it. I couldn't get an answer as to whether Tinkerfield was going to be demolished or not. The city council people either didn't know at the time or weren't telling anyone. And I was in touch with one of the reporters on the Orlando Sentinel who was following this. And finally, he did tell me that the plaque had been stolen from the police. The police had told him that, and that there was most likely it had been melted down. So,
yeah, that was our concern. 2 years ago at spring training, when they were tearing it down, or maybe it was 3 years ago now, I did drive up from Fort Myers and picked up 5 seats from Tinker Field. So we have those at Target Field.
Well, if you want, you can get in touch with me. I can send you an electronic copy of the photo if you want, of the plaque, if you wanted to use it.
And you can do the same. It might be easier. It's just, my contact information is just my name, Clyde Doepner at twinsbaseball.com.
Okay.
If you can send that, I was going to ask you anyhow that off mic here let's hook up and talk. I'd love to sit down and talk with you, and if you're in this area, get together with you. There's so much I can learn.
We always have a talk going on Sunday
you.
mornings here, Clyde. You're always welcome.
Well, this is a fantastic invite. I appreciate it.
Because I'd like nothing better than to have that plaque somewhere, a photo of that plaque somewhere.
Well, get a hold of me. I'll do another dig through our archives. We're making everything digital now.
Okay.
Young kids are passing up wheel poopers, and I'll do another dig and see if by any chance when they've gone through things we can come up with that.
Okay, very good.
Did you guys save the seats from the presidential box that all these presidents threw the first ball out from?
I can tell you this, Ralph. I'm not sure whether Clyde has it with Minnesota, but I know that Phil Wood, who's a personal friend of mine, who's done a lot of work with Masson and is a great memorabilia collector. But there is a footage on our website, and it shows the presidential seats and photographs of Kennedy, and Phil Wood talks about that because he was talking about my dad being named George Washington Case. So the whole thing was a July 4th celebration at Nationals Park, and Phil did the pregame and said, fans, do you know that George Washington once played baseball in Washington D.C. and he has a picture of my dad in his uniform, and then he also has a picture of a seat from the presidential box, and above that seat was the picture of President Kennedy.
Oh, wow. That's great.
George, I learned something I didn't ever know was George Washington Case.
Yeah. Well, it was, and it was just. It was coincidence. I mean, I'm George Washington Case III. My son is George Washington Case IV. My dad was George Washington Case Jr. His father was George Washington Case Sr., dating back to the mid-1800s when my grandfather was born. But back then, and even today, there are names of presidents included in certain people's names. And Ronnie would know One example
Jack
of that
Roosevelt
is Jackie Robinson. Roosevelt Robinson, exactly. Right.
Named after Teddy Roosevelt.
Right.
A good history of the relationship between the presidents and baseball is Paul Dixon's book, The President's Game, where he actually traces back baseball to Lincoln's time. Apparently Lincoln was able to watch a form of baseball that was being played on what later became the White House grounds during the Civil War. So there's a whole history there of the linkage between the presidents and baseball.
Right, and you know what, David? There's also a linkage, and if we talked about baseball traditions, and whether this is true or not, it was told to me, but I think it was William Howard Taft threw out the first ball. I believe it was 1911. But during, I think, the seventh inning of the game, he just happened to stand up to stretch his legs, because he was a huge man. He was 300 and some pounds, and all the fans in the ballpark stood up because the President of the United States stood, and so another fan stood, and that was the beginning of the seventh inning stretch tradition.
That's right.
In Major League Baseball.
No,
that's
kidding.
right.
Huh.
Yeah, that's right.
How interesting.
I've heard that too, yeah.
Taft was
Very
also an
interesting.
incredibly witty man. A woman comes up to him and says, "My husband told me that you probably wouldn't say 2 words to me." And he says, "He wins."
That's very funny.
Or something, or that he'd only say 2 words to you. He wins. So, Ronnie, you got to tell us. You mentioned Kennedy. We talk about him. Your dad was his friend, Kennedy.
Very close friend, right?
Stayed in his home.
He stayed at our home, both Jack and Bob.
Do you have any memories of Kennedy that might have anything to do with baseball?
Well, yeah, he used to talk to me about baseball a lot. He loved baseball. I think he was a Boston Red Sox fan, of course, but growing up in Massachusetts. But yeah.
Hey, what are you going to do? Shoot a guy?
Yeah, right. That's right. And then in Los Angeles, when I was at the convention, I worked on his staff, on Jack's staff, and I had a job as in those days they used to woo delegates. So my job was I'd have a little office a little room in the Biltmore Hotel where I had an office and a phone, and the administrative assistant of the mayor of Chicago or the governor of New York or governor of New Jersey or whoever was coming in, I would see to it that there was a limousine at the airport compliments of Jack Kennedy. So anyhow, it was quite exciting. And then his acceptance speech was done at the Los Angeles Coliseum, where the Dodgers were playing at the time, because Dodger Stadium hadn't been built yet. And it was so exciting because I was there one night to watch the Dodgers, and the next night I'm there to see the president speak and give this acceptance speech. So it was very, very exciting for me. He was a tremendous guy. Jack was a great, great guy. He was just down to earth. I was the gopher. When he'd go and speak at a banquet or something, because I was campaigning with him in Wisconsin. My dad was convinced him to run in the Wisconsin primary in 1960 because he felt if he could be a Hubert Humphrey in his backyard, it would help catapult him to the nomination, which in fact it did. So I'd be up in his suite in the hotel, and he never wanted to eat dinner at a banquet. By the time he got to his food, it was always cold. So he'd say to me, "Ronnie, get the usual." And I'd run down the back steps to the kitchen, and the usual was a cup of clam chowder soup, a peanut butter sandwich, and a glass of beer. And I'd bring it to him. He was quite a guy. He was
Memories
quite a guy.
that you have. That's terrific.
Yeah.
Yeah. This has been a terrific show.
Has this been fun?
Clyde, I want you to come back more often.
Well, you've got my number.
I do.
Okay.
I do.
Well, we're here every Sunday at high noon Eastern time. So Ronnie is going to keep in touch and make sure that you do come back and share your terrific memories. We're honored. I have quite a group of guys right here that are all Washington and Minnesota. Let me just say, David, your book is basically the definitive book on Washington baseball. I mean,
during World War II, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
so. Thank you. I
think Washington baseball is pretty much defined by World War II, given everything and given how they were so instrumental in keeping the game alive during the war. Clark Griffith, according to your book, really campaigned for that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
In fact, how close did that come to shutting down the sport?
Oh, very closely. In fact, there was once the war broke out, the owners were prepared to close the game for the duration. But it was Kennesaw Mountain Landis, the commissioner, who hated Roosevelt, and I guess he thought he could pin the demise of baseball on FDR. Sent him a letter saying, "Well, it's time. Maybe it's up to you. We should." I'm paraphrasing, of course. We should shut this down. And what do you think? And Roosevelt came back, and I've always believed that Clark Griffith actually was the man behind the pen on this particular letter that came to be known as the Green Light Letter, where he said, no, let's keep baseball alive. It's good for morale here on the home front and for our troops. And that was the impetus to keep the game going during World War II. And because Roosevelt had first met Griffith back in 1918 when he was Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and he subbed for a higher rank official at the old Nationals Washington baseball park to raise the flag on opening day, and that's where he met.
Did I lose everybody, or?
No, I'm here.
What did I?
No.
Oh.
Anyway, one quick. It's called The Nats and the Grays. Get it plugged into the title.
Where can it be purchased?
You can order it through any bookstore or online through Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com.
All right. The only other question I'm going to ask you, you grew up a Yankee fan, am I correct? David?
Yeah.
When did you become officially a Washington fan?
I guess when the Nationals moved here, came down from Montreal. I was dying for a team here. My Yankees are still my number one, but I'm certainly rooting for the Nationals now over the Cubbies.
Well, I have to say I'm rooting for them, not because I like the Cubs any less than the Nationals. I don't. I'm rooting for Dusty Baker.
Yeah.
I love Dusty Baker.
Yep.
Yeah, as a human, he isn't particularly the best handler of pitching staffs historically. As a Giant apologist, I remember the Angels attesting to that. But by the same token, what a great guy, a terrific human being, and I'd like to see him win.
Yeah, he's sort of the calm after the storm, to paraphrase our current occupant of the White House. Because
he's
Matt
a real
Williams,
Renaissance man. He's got so many things going on. He's got music going on in his life, and he's one of those people that uses baseball as a means where he can go internationally and promote peace. And I think if there is going to be peace in this world, it's got to come from the sporting world. I mean, we
Right.
see how powerful they are with the national anthem thing going on, and we have to get some logic in this world, and baseball is started with Japan, going to Japan. It's a peacemaker, and let's hope
It's a great ambassador for the game and for the country.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. And nothing comes to mind with Washington. It was okay to have a relationship with Cuba, even when we didn't have a relationship with Cuba, because we had people like Pascual, Ramos, and what have you. They weren't thought of as the evil Reds. They were thought of as a pretty good baseball academy. Minnie Minoso and the boys.
Well, it was, Ralph, when you're talking about that, and I know we're pressed for time, and maybe next time we'll talk. But the Cuban connection, I mean, that's what it was. Joe Cambria was the scout for Clark Griffith and brought a lot of the Cuban talent into this country. And, there was a very strong relationship for many years between Cuba and America with regard to baseball.
Yeah, especially in Washington.
If we ever get on that topic, I would love to bring Tony Oliva on board, because no one can attest to the significance of Joe Cambria and what it was like to be a young Cuban coming to this country. Tony does so well.
Yeah, let's do that. That would be great.
Yeah, I can get Tony to come on. He'd love that.
I'd love to meet Tony Oliva once again. I got to meet him when he was a roving instructor with the Twins, and I'm from the West Coast. I was the Tops rep, and met him in Visalia. Visalia was a real contributor to the Twins back in the day, in the 80s and early 90s. And they sent people like Hocking, I remember, started in Visalia. Kent Herback hit a home run in Visalia one night and hit a home run in Yankee Stadium the next night.
Yep.
That was
wearing number 26. Before he switched to 14. Yep.
In your program, ladies and gentlemen, we call your attention to Home Plate, where Clyde Doepner will give out the annual award for Jackie Robinson's fans to Ronnie Rabinovitz.
Hey, Clyde, very quickly, what was your email address again?
My name, Clyde, C-L-Y-D-E.
Yeah.
Doepner at twinsbaseball.com.
Got it. Okay. It's Doepner with a B or P?
D-O-E.
P as in Paul, and then N-E-R.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, thank you for everyone. I'm smarter because I listen, and it's not always my strong point, and I'm just so lucky you had me on today. Great being amongst you. Judged by the
Clyde, thank you.
Enjoyed talking to everybody. Yep. Thank you.
Okay. I haven't shortchanged anybody. Everybody's gotten in what they want to say. Am I correct?
Yeah, we're good to go.
There's always next time, too. Let's do it again.
Right.
Please.
That's right. Thank
you. This is
really
thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody out there. If you're listening, Comfortably Zoned Radio Network will be back next week. The Senators Twins has present future. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Ronnie.
Bye-bye.
Adios, guys.
Bye-bye. Bye.